Fans around the world do not know anything about the music from Saber Rider, except that your name is listed in the credits. Did you only compose the music, or has there been more work from your side? And most of all, the fans were always wondering who was the vocalist of the opening and ending theme.
Saber Rider was one of my favorite projects. I wrote and orchestrated the music, and like all of our cartoons at that time, I sang the main title song. I also did the music editing.
Can you tell us something about the whole creation process that went on when creating the soundtrack back then?
At the time we were starting Saber Rider, we had just finished Voltron, like 120 episodes. And at the same time, I was writing for Hanna-Barbera on their cartoons and learning a lot about cartoon music from their head writer, Hoyt Curtin. So I was also meeting a lot of the great musicians that he had been using. So on Saber Rider, I just brought them over to play on our sessions. And these are the top guys you can get in the Hollywood area, and they'll play on the cartoons too. Our drummer on the sessions was Timothy Mulholland, and he had a particular sound that if I was going to do more Saber Rider music now, we'd have to recreate that sound because it was part of it. And as I listen to the music, it's really part of that sound. All the guitars were played by Steve Carnelli, a great guitarist who can play all types of guitars, banjos, anything you need, and all different styles. So he was real important to the sound, and I knew how to write for Steve. I play a little guitar myself, so I knew basically how to write for it. Wally Snow was on percussion. He was from Hanna-Barbera. Charles Davis, the lead trumpet player. I always like to use 3 trumpets. I'm an old trumpet player myself. 3 trumpets, a couple of tenor trombones, and at least 1 bass trombone because I really and a tuba because I really like those low bass notes. I think I learned that watching James Bond movies when I was a kid. That sound really stuck with me, and I love those deep notes. I remember using 5 particular studios to record in. I think the earliest sessions were done at a studio called Monterey, where I believe the Carpenters used to record their music. The string sessions were done at Chick Corea's studio. That's in Hollywood. And then as we went on, the music was recorded over maybe 6 months, as I remember, at different studios. Skyline Studio in Topanga, Interlock Studios on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, and also Rusk Recording Studio in Hollywood, where I think Donna Summer used to record her big hits. We would book a day, a 3-hour day, and record about 15 minutes of music in those 3 hours. And that's what I learned from Hanna-Barbera, how to get in there and start putting that music down fast. And you have to do that on cartoons because you just don't have that big a budget. And I always had great engineers. Peter Lewis did the early sessions, the main title and things like that. Mike Byriger, who also mixed the entire show, put the dialogue and the sound effects and the music together in the final mixes, also mixed some of the music. And then I met Mark Schiffman, who became my engineer that we worked together for many years after that. He worked on Saber Rider also. I remember those first sessions we had at Monterey Studio. I always sit in the booth, and through the glass, I could see all these musicians from the left side, the brass trumpets at the back, and the trombones, and the guitarist Steve was in the back. And as you look across, going from left to right, then there's a partition, and then there's Tim with his drum set. And right next to him was Wally with these 3 or 4 timpanis and all kinds of crazy percussion instruments. And Tim always cracked me up because he always gets into the music. He's like he's on stage even when he's in the studio, and he really gets into the music, and that inspires everybody. And I almost forgot the French horns. I've always used French horns, a nice 3-man section on even when I didn't have budget for a lot of other things, I always wanted to have those French horns because it's a great sound. And also, Clark Gassman played keyboards on those earlier sessions and did a lot of good work on those sessions. Later on, I did a lot of the programming myself. Once we got into MIDI more in the late 80s and early 90s, then I started getting more into it and pre-recording my own synthesizer tracks. But those first sessions were done old-fashioned style with just on the downbeat, everybody was playing, and that music would knock you against the back wall because we were all having a lot of fun.
How long did it take to plan, compose, and record the whole soundtrack for the show?
I remember writing the main title for Saber Rider on piano at my house, and this must have been 3 or 4 months before we ever got into production on the show. And I remember giving probably a cassette back then of it to Peter, and he was on a plane somewhere, maybe back to St. Louis where the production company was. And I think he called me from the air or something, and he really liked it. He really liked that main title, and he was really happy, and he was ready to go. And so once he okayed it, and he basically okayed it that night, then it was just a matter of finding out where I wanted to go with the music and the cowboy thing and a little bit of Spanish flair and the rock feel with a lot of drums and guitars. A lot of guitars at that time were really cool, and I just fell right into that. I went out and bought a D35 Martin acoustic guitar. This gave me an excuse. And, I wrote a pretty good portion of those cues on the guitar with the guitar in mind. And once the show was sold and we had the go-ahead, I just jumped right in and started writing the music. It seems like it would take about a week to write that 15 minutes of music. And then we would mix it, and then I'd be back writing again. And seems like we did most of that production over about a 6-month period.
Where did you get your inspirations when you worked on the music for Saber Rider?
As far as inspirations for writing the music, I know a lot of people do homework and listen to other people, and some people I think even kind of blatantly copy things that they hear. I never really do. I never really did that. Maybe it sounds like certain people, but I mean, your inspirations are within you. You can't change the way it's going to sound. At some point, you develop your own style, and that's true. But it's always going to sound a little bit like whoever inspired you. But I never went out to try to say I'm going to make this sound like this or this. I always figured if I just sat down at the piano and started pounding, something is going to come eventually that I liked. And somehow on Saber Rider, everything was just working really well. I don't know, it just fit my ear really well. This project did. The Spanish feel, the cowboy, everything, the rock feel. The fact that I wasn't getting people telling me left and right, you got to do this and you got to do that. And Peter was always fabulous about giving me a lot of space. And so this was a lot of fun. So as far as inspiration, I'm sure you'll pick out some things in there. One cue has a little bit of James Bond flavor to me, but I didn't mean it to be that way. But as I listen back to it, I say, that sounds a little bit like that to me. And there's other things that sound like other things, but I didn't try to do that. It was just, I guess, things floating around in my head. But as far as inspiration, at that point, I was just ready to write for this show, and just things really came out fast and furiously. The whip, I mean, I always thought that was really cool, the whip in there. That was a synthesizer player who had that sample. And I'm sorry, I don't remember his name now. He played in the early sessions. And he had that cool whip sample. And I just loved it. I asked him if he had it, and he brought it, and it was perfect. And of course, my other inspiration was that D35 Martin acoustic guitar, which I still use today to write songs.
In the Japanese original version of Saber Rider, the soundtrack was quite different, and it didn't feature Wild West-like music as much as the US version did. Was this change a decision made by World Events Productions, or was it your own idea?
I never did hear the original Japanese music for Saber Rider, and I understand the Fireball character was more of a major part of the show, but our producer Peter Keefe came up with the idea of making it more of a Wild West kind of a show and bringing Saber Rider up as the main character and also making Colt more important to the show.
So you didn't receive the Japanese tracks as well when you began working on this project?
No, I never received any Japanese tracks on the show. What I received was the picture edited the way they wanted to have it for the American version, and the English dialogue that was recorded here in Hollywood by the voiceover actors.
What do you think when you hear that the series aired in other countries as well, and that especially the opening theme is loved by many viewers, not only in the USA?
I actually think Saber Rider has had a better life in other countries than it did here in the United States. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a video rental store and I saw Saber Rider. So I said, hey, I'll just rent it and see what we were doing. And I was impressed. I really liked the show. And I thought the music sounded great. I must have watched it 3 or 4 times that day. A friend of mine called me about a year or two ago and said I should punch my name and Saber Rider up on the internet because people were talking about it. And I thought that was great.
In Saber Rider, there are some songs which represent certain characters. Especially Colt's theme has become very popular among fans. Was there a specific reason why only for this character's theme vocal parts were used in addition?
Well, like I said before, most of the time I just sit down at the piano and start pounding it out and seeing what comes. And I knew we had definite characters, April and Colt and Fireball and Saber Rider, as well as the bad guys. And it was just easy to go ahead and write these themes. As far as Colt, it's just a good strong word, Colt. And it just seemed to want to say Colt. So that's what I did. Fireball was just a little theme that I wrote on acoustic guitar. And Saber Rider, of course, was already covered with the main title. And I wrote quite a few different April themes, more prettier kind of sounding things. But I think Colt is the one that most people remember. And I think I like it best too.